I am a college dropout. Now, that might sound weird to a lot of you because you know of me as one of the only college students at this church. And I'm certainly in college right now, but there was a point in my life where I did actually have to drop out of college. I was 18, freshly graduated from high school. I was ready to take on the world. I knew that I wanted to go into ministry, so I found a Bible college where I could study to be a pastor. And this had been my dream job that I had since I was in junior high. So I chose to go to a Bible college. And this Bible college was in Eugene, Oregon. Yes, Eugene, not Portland. So I started attending this Bible college, and I absolutely loved the classes. I loved the people. I loved the environment. I thought it was where I was going to be to get my undergraduate degree. But then very shortly into my experience at that college, I started to feel this calling to go away, to go to a different college. And I can't exactly explain this feeling. I couldn't explain it then, and I still can't fully explain it now, only that it was some kind of calling that I had to say, this is not the place where you're supposed to be right now, Alex. And like you do with any of these feelings, I ignored it for a long time. I knew that I had the feeling around week 3 or so, and probably week 8 or so of the semester, I still hadn't said anything, but it just wasn't going away. So eventually, I told my parents about this feeling of like, hey, I'm thinking about maybe switching colleges, and they were very supportive of it. So because I had people who were supporting me in it, and I felt like there was this call, I decided to start to do something about this feeling. I ended up contacting Multnoma's admissions department, and I visited the school with them around week 12 of the semester, and found out right away this school is the perfect fit for me. So the very next day, after I had met with Multnoma, I told my advisor I'm leaving, and I was out of the school by the end of the week. I'd actually dropped out of college. And now you have to understand something about me. I am a planner. Like, if you have ever looked at my phone, for most of the time I've been at Multnoma, it's my Google Calendar, telling me exactly where I need to be every second of the day, every minute, because I like to know what's coming ahead. I've also always had a 5-year plan. Since junior high, I've known exactly what I wanted to do and the steps I need to take in order to do that. If that's what college I need to go to, what books I need to read, no matter what it is, I like having a plan, and I like knowing what my future holds. And I had the same plan when I went to this college in Eugene. I knew that this college was a good school, that I could become a pastor through this college, and I had planned out my entire time there in the few weeks. But this calling from God made me learn that I need to trust God and His timing and His call on my life more than any kind of 5-year personal plan that I might develop myself. And there's this character in the Bible who also had to learn how to trust God in this way, but in a much greater magnitude. And that character is Abraham. And throughout his life, he showed great faith in God by recognizing and obeying God's calling in his life. Let's see. Oh, there we go. Okay. All right. There we go. So, Genesis 12 is our main text for the day, and it goes, "The Lord said to Abram, 'Go from your land, your relatives, and your father's house, to the land that I will show you. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you, and I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing.'" So pay attention here. The first thing that the Lord tells Abraham is go. Yes, go. Very abrupt. Abraham is here living in this land called Ur, and he's being told out of the blue, go. Like, imagine if you're at work and someone just comes up to you and says, go. Like, what would your reaction be? You'd be kind of taken aback, like, what are you doing right now? Like, I like where I'm saying, where I am right now, this is my comfort zone. I like being here. I don't want to go. But God is calling Abraham to go. And not just to go, but to go from your land. Now, land is another place that we find a lot of comfort in. I just think about how much I liked being in my hometown just because I was very familiar with all the places around there. Especially for me, roads. Driving on roads that I'm comfortable with, I can drive all day. Put me in Portland roads, I hate driving. I will take all these wrong turns. I will be stressed out all the time. I'm just not comfortable in it. But put me in country back roads where I grew up, I'm going to drive 2 or 3 hours every single day, and I am perfectly happy because I'm comfortable in that. But by God telling Abraham to go from your land, it's pushing him outside of his area of comfort to go to this place that's going to be hostile. And he's also asking Abraham a second thing in going, and that's go from your relatives, your father's house. This is your family. This is another area that can bring us a lot of comfort. We often rely on our family, and our families are really good things that we like to have because they bring us such comfort. They are our home. But here, God is asking Abraham to leave even his family in order to follow this calling. So it's a really huge step of faith that Abraham has to take in order to follow God's call here. And he does, actually. And because he does, we often see Abraham as this very, very perfect, saintly figure that is too high up there to ever actually meet him and where his faith is. And Abraham is a pinnacle of what faith looks like in the Bible, one of the greatest examples that we have. But I also want to show today how Abraham is also a human in his faith, and that his faith journey also reflects what a lot of our faith journey looks like. Because our stories of faith, we both have these high points and we have low points. And we tend to focus on either one or the other. When we look at Abraham, we often focus on the high points of his faith. When we look at our own life, we may only focus on the high points. We may only focus on the low points, depending on the person. So, one example of another high point in Abraham's faith is Genesis 15, 1-6. After these events, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield. Your reward will be very great. But Abram said, Lord God, what can you give me since I am childless? And the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus. See, to give you a little bit of context of what's happening here, is in Genesis 12, God promises Abraham, I'm going to make you into a great nation. But in order for Abraham to become a great nation, he needs a son. So throughout the book of Genesis, we're waiting for when is Abraham going to have this son? And 3 chapters have passed now, and that son still isn't here. So Abraham's starting to question, God, I've already taken this step of faith for you. I've left my land. I've left my family. Now, when am I going to get the son? When are you going to fulfill your promise to make me into a great nation? But in his questioning, he's not saying that God's not going to do this. He's just questioning, God, when are you going to do this? Continue. Abraham continued, Look, you have given me no offspring, so a slave born in my house will be my heir. Now the word of the Lord came to him. This one will not be your heir. Instead, one who comes from your own body will be your heir. He took him outside and said, Look at the sky and count the stars, if you are able to count them. Then he said to him, Your offspring will be that numerous. And Abram believed the Lord, and it was credited to him as righteousness. You see, Abraham, even though in all of his external circumstances, it doesn't look like God is fulfilling his promises right now, he's still able, even though he's questioning, he's wondering, and actually will ask a question to God, God, are you going to do this? At the end of the day, he's still able to come down to, I believe God. I believe his promises even when I do not see how his promises are going to be fulfilled. I believe that God will fulfill his promise. So here he's showing an incredible amount of faith, one that we can aspire to have. But then if we just turn the page, chapter 16, we'll find an example where Abraham doesn't quite show as much faith. Genesis 16, 1-3 says, Abraham's wife, Sarai, had not borne any children for him, but she owned an Egyptian slave named Hagar. Sarai said to Abram, Since the Lord has prevented me from bearing children, go to my slave. Perhaps through her I can build a family. And Abraham agreed to what Sarai said. So Abram's wife, Sarai, took Hagar, her Egyptian slave, and gave her to her husband, Abram, as a wife for him. This happened after Abram had lived in the land of Canaan 10 years. So notice how we're still in the same context as chapter 15. Abraham is looking for a son so that the promise can be fulfilled. But in 15, he's saying, Lord, I believe you. I'm going to wait. In 16, he and his wife, they're devising a plan so that Abram can have a son. They're not quite showing faith in God here because they're saying, yeah, you did make this promise, God, but I'm going to do things my own way here because I just don't know if I can fully trust with what you're saying right now. He's showing this moment of weakness in his faith where it's the same thing where he believes it, but his actions aren't always going to line up with that. He's really not perfect. And that, I think, is incredibly important for us to remember as the people of God, that even Abraham, who we hold up as the example of faith, is not perfect in his faith. He has these moments of highs and lows. So if we ever have these moments of lows in our life, to know that those low points of faith aren't what define us. That we should not use those low moments to sulk and to say that we're bad people, but use those low moments still to propel us forward to still continually trust God. Because he's had this low moment, but look at what the New Testament authors describe him as. By faith, Abraham, when he was called, obeyed and set out for a place that he was going to receive as an inheritance. He went out even though he did not know where he was going. By faith, he stayed as a foreigner in the land of promise, living in tents as did Isaac and Jacob, co-heirs of the same promise. Or Romans 4:18-21. He believed, hoping against hope, so that he became the father of many nations, according to what had been spoken. So will your descendants be. He did not weaken in faith when he considered his own body to be already dead, since he was about 100 years old, and also the deadness of Sarah's womb. He did not waver in unbelief at God's promise, but was strengthened in his faith and gave glory to God, because he was fully convinced that what God had promised, he was able to do. See, when we just read this, we may think that Abraham was absolutely perfect, the saint that I can never live up to. But look at the Old Testament. Look at his humanness. Look at how everyone's journey of faith is going to look like Abraham's. Look much more like the full story of Abraham. But at the end of the day, New Testament authors can still talk about Abraham's faith like this, because we're not going to be defined by the moments of failure, our moments of weakness. We're going to be defined about what did you do when God asked you to step out in faith? Did you obey him? And I like to think of it like I'm also someone who loves graphs and numbers, so I have a few graphs. And learning to trust God, we often think of it like this, where it's just, if I'm going to trust God, then I trust him more, and 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 there's never going to be any kind of backslide. Like, some people may operate like that, but I know for sure that's not me. Like, I have a lot of ups and downs, goods and bads throughout all of my life, and I want it to say that I'm going on an upward trajectory, but I'm definitely not only going up. But as we talk about low points, there's also danger that learning to trust God looks like this, where it only becomes ups and downs, ups and downs, ups and downs, but that we end up staying stagnant. See, this is where it's important that we take the low points of our lives, the times that we know that we didn't trust God, and we use those to say, next time, Lord, I'm going to trust you. So that our spiritual journey can look something more like this. Because this is a much more realistic picture of what our spiritual journey will look like. Where the ideal is that we are learning to trust God more and more throughout our lives, but it's messy. It's very, very messy. It's a jagged line that goes up and down all the time. But we're growing in those ups and downs still. So I just think about my own personal story with finances. I am someone who tends to really struggle with trusting God with my money. And one of the things that have really impacted me in my own life with finances is when I was starting my master's program. And seminary, I looked at the bill for seminary. And seminary is very, very expensive, especially for a college student. Going into it, I had absolutely no clue how I was going to pay for it. I knew that graduating seminary, I wasn't going to be making very much money. So if I took out loans, then it would take me a very long time to ever pay it back. And I was just very, very resistant because I didn't have a plan to have this paid off in 5 years. Like, it wasn't fitting with my own personal 5-year plan, but I felt called by the Lord that I needed to go to seminary. So for one of the few times in my life, I actually said, Lord, I don't know how I'm going to provide for this, but because I feel this calling, I'm going to still go for seminary degree. And that first year, I was dirt poor. Like, I had to take my car off of insurance. I had to live off about $50 a month on food in order to make ends meet. Like my lunches, I always joke, my lunches were 2 pieces of bread and 2 pieces of meat. Cheese was too expensive for me at the time. But after a year of living like that, I started to get random gifts from students, where it just anonymous donations to the school for a couple $100. I got a scholarship from the school that was another $1,000 or $2,000, and I even found a place to live for free. And it was this moment of, Lord, this was one of these times I was able to step out and wonder how you were going to provide. And the Lord did. And just sometimes the Lord is really amazing like that. And it's not a promise that the Lord will always do that. But when we do really step out in faith and trust him, he often does. And by me stepping out in faith and finances like that, doesn't mean I'm always perfect with my finances. There are plenty of times where I just don't trust the Lord with my money still. I do still tend to keep money to myself, and it's something that I have been trying to work on so much, and it's one of those areas where I know I need to grow in, because I would not count myself good at it. But I hope that throughout my life that I can have more of these experiences where I see when I step out in faith that God does provide, and that will propel me to then trust God more and more throughout my life. So I have a driving question for the whole church today, and that is, where is God calling us to take a step out in faith? It may be with finances, or maybe with something else. You all have your own personal story, and the thing with God's calling to step out in faith is that this will look different for every person. You see, just because I was called to drop out of college does not mean that everyone is supposed to go drop out of college. So, because of this, it's a little hard to give you specific response examples. So, there are papers and pens in the back, and what I'm going to encourage everyone to do is for 5 minutes, just sit in silence and ask the Lord, is there something that you're asking me to step out in faith right now? There may be something, there may not be. But if you feel led by the Lord to write something down, then write something down. And I would encourage you, if you are in the sanctuary today, share it with a friend after church. Or if you are listening online, text someone from the church. Let them know what you're thinking. Because the other thing with the calling, knowing a calling from the Lord, is that there is discernment in this to make sure that it is a calling from the Lord. So a few parameters of just general wisdom that I would encourage you to follow is, 1, make sure your calling is according to the Bible. If you feel called to do something that the Bible defines as a sin, then know that that's not going to be from the Lord. And secondly, I would highly encourage you to talk about your calling in community and to have wisdom from the church as you discern if it's a calling from the Lord. And this doesn't mean that what your community says is exactly what you're going to do, but to still dive into community and get other mature Christians' opinions on it. Now, with this, I do have one response for the church. And this is something that has been very near and dear to my heart. And that's our church situation right now with the homeless. And just the unsurety that we have, because as some of you know, there is going to be a new homeless camp with about 60 homeless pods right across the street. And because of that, we don't know what this neighborhood is going to look like in the next year. I would say, because of Abraham and his faith, and specifically how he's not afraid, I would call the church to stay faithful here at the church, even though we don't know what the future of this church is going to look like in a year. That some people may feel legitimately called to move away, and if you do feel called, then it is follow that calling, but make sure that if you are someone who feels like you are being called to go away from the church, that is not because of fear of what is going to happen in this neighborhood. So, I'm going to give you all about 5 minutes to write down if you feel any kind of calling to trust the Lord in, and then I'll pray. Dear Lord, thank you for giving us the story of Abraham, giving us an example of someone who shows great faith, yet is human, someone who reflects the spiritual journey of us all. I pray that through the story of Abraham that we can all learn to take more and more steps of faith so that we can trust you and know you more. I pray that throughout our weeks we don't forget about the lessons, that we can put this into practice. And I pray that if anyone did write anything down, that you can just encourage us to actually do something and step out. Amen.